Okay, everybody. Thanks for listening. And my theme for tonight is listening. So let me give you the background for this. So I've been practicing law about 45 years, and about 25 years ago, I found out that there was money available through the county to develop what they call alternative dispute resolution. Now I'm going to Japan tomorrow, and when you go to the clerk's office where the courthouse is, they have screens up and little cute figures. Only Japanese would have these cute figures wandering around the courthouse saying, if you want to talk through your dispute, go to this window over here. And they were inviting people to mediation and conciliation right there while they're standing in line in the courthouse. So, thinking about that, I came back here and started a nonprofit called the Congress of Neutrals. And we ended up training hundreds of mediators in this county and getting a contract to provide mediators for the court. So there's a phrase called alternative dispute resolution. We talk about it now because there's a lot of violence and conflict going around. But ADR, or alternative dispute resolution, only makes sense in the context of the courthouse. So it's not really our theme for tonight. Usual dispute resolution is seen as conflict in the courtroom, litigation. And so people realize that the judges have 10,000 cases each, and they're not going to have time to really sort through and decide and order things like a monologue. This is the way it's going to be. So they allow people to go out of the courtroom and solve their own problems through negotiation and talking to each other. So that's the background for alternative dispute resolution. However, there are many types of alternative dispute resolution. The two that you need to know about are mediation, where there's a neutral party who comes in to guide and facilitate a dialogue to get to some common ground. The other type is called conciliation. And in conciliation, um, you don't really have a goal so much of coming to a settlement on a particular dispute. Your goal is to bring the parties together and assume that once they can recognize each other as human beings again, that they'll get along better and do better and get along. And it's hugely powerful. It's very, very important. So I'll talk about that some more. So I'm gonna screen share now and put up a couple of slides. But while I'm doing that, I have a question for you all. And because this is an interactive thing, I want people to jump in with comments and questions. The question I want you to answer is, at one of our recent wars, I can't remember if it was Desert Storm or the war with Iraq, the local newspapers, back when there were newspapers, asked a question. At the beginning of that war, they went around to the top mediators in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they asked them this question: could this war have been um, avoided uh, by mediation? So I think I'm sharing too much of the screen here. I want to go back to, but what do you think? Could a war like that war, either with Iraq or the one previous with, could it have been avoided through mediation? Any thoughts on that? So, what do you think? Do you think that a war could be avoided if mediator got involved?
I, I'll just speak up. I kind of doubt it because I think both sides need to agree that they want to mediate. And I can't imagine either with Hussein uh, or Kuwait. I can't imagine both sides coming together wanting that. I mean, I think it could have been avoided if we, I mean, the Iraq War could have been avoided if we didn't bomb Iraq, but, but I don't think it could have been avoided through mediation.
The other
Okay.
thing was missing was a common set of facts. The U.S. thought it had some facts, and it didn't. Uh, Hussein wasn't about to share facts by nature. Those were problems with any attempt to.
Well, that's a good comment. Both those are good comments. I'll get to it. But one of the things that mediators are supposed to do are start drawing people into sharing facts. And I'll get to that in just a minute. There's 5 stages of mediation and so forth. And one of them is your storytelling. You tell what you think is real. So any other thoughts on whether you could avoid a war with mediators?
Tom, just to comment, I guess. I mean, it seems like the higher you go in an organization, and particularly in governments, the more resistance there is to sitting at the table and discussing things.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why nobody pays too much attention to what's coming from the leaders of nations, because most of the negotiation and mediation and hard work is done by mid-level diplomats. That's where life is at in terms of communication and work hard among nations. It's staffers, it's civil servants. Those are the people that are doing the real communication that's going on there. So the short answer is, in theory, it could have been avoided if people were willing to talk, but mediation and communication that we're talking about, the very first principle is that it's consensual. And if people don't want to talk, they're not going to talk. So there's many people, many times we want to talk to somebody else about sustainability, about the importance of our work, but they don't want to talk about it. And we have to take people where they're coming from. And if they don't want to talk about it, that's the way it is. So uh,
Tom, can I give another very pertinent example
yeah,
right now?
yeah, jump in.
And I hope some of you, the rest of you, are listening to a terrific documentary series by Ken Burns about the American Revolution. It's going on each night this week. And wow, that was the first one was about how it started and how there wasn't anyway, the emotional side is what was missing there. There was they had anger on both sides and irrational fear and
Civil
so
dialogue,
forth. It
sustainability.
really made mediation not possible, not to mention the 3,000 miles between parties. But anyway, they talked about mediation as if it could happen, but no.
Often it can. And there's a structure that goes onto it. So I put up the slide here that talks about the 5 stages of mediation. And when you teach mediation, or you teach people how to have a constructive dialogue, it's important to see these stages of mediation to talk to people. The first one is, for me, the most important. It's called contracting. And this is where people agree that they're going to talk, and where they're going to talk, and when they're going to talk, and they set the stage for the negotiations that are going to go on, or the discussion that's going to go on. It's absolutely essential. Sometimes I want to talk to somebody in the hallway at church. There's no agreement. That's the wrong time. It's the wrong place. That's not the time to have those conversations. That's contracting. The other thing about contracting that is so important to creating a safe space is that you have to disclose who you are and what you're doing. I just may not want to talk to somebody about how their family's doing, or, what's going on with the state of the world. I may want to talk to them about electrification and clean energy, or permitting reform, or whatever it is. You have to disclose who you are and what you're doing. It's very, very important to creating a safe space, because people won't trust you. You won't be a trusted messenger. This is true in mediation. It's true for all these meetings. The second stage is storytelling, and that's where you take turns. One side will give their point of view. In theory, the other side is listening respectfully while that's going on, and then the other side will tell their story. Then you get deeper into it by identifying what the problems are and identifying the issues, and working the problem is where you and I would try to find common ground. For example, at the recent virtual CCL conference, they were saying common ground is many people on both sides of the aisle want many different types of energy. All the above is sort of what they want. And that's important to know, that they're open to all kinds of ideas about how to solve these energy problems and so forth. So that's working the problem and finding common ground. The last one is reaching consensus. And in a mediation before the court, it's a settlement contract. So the whole thing is an agreement. It's an agreement, number one, in contracting to get into the discussion and to come out of it with something that we share in common ground. Like, I'll turn it over to my staff. Let's study this idea of reforming the permit process for new electric projects and so forth. That's the consensus that you want to reach and so forth. Um, so that's the importance of contracting and disclosing your bias and your ground rules and so forth. I have one.
Tom,
Yeah,
can
jump
I
in.
ask a question?
Yeah.
Is where in this 5-step thing does organizational structure and bias and um, I don't know. It just seemed like, having worked for the government, a lot of times the structure of the government and the bias of the government prevented me from sitting down and going in the direction I wanted to go.
Sure. Because you don't really have a portfolio. They're the government, and they're kind of used to having it their way and so forth. But there are many ways that this can work out, even so. And I want to give one example. So there was a famous story among mediators about some white supremacists, and they had been threatening violence. And I wish I had the site for this, whether it was Colorado or another state. I believe it was Colorado. They had been threatening violence, and the police were onto them, and they were threatening to kill people, and it was bad. And so somebody wanted communication to make it less violent, because when people are feeling helpless and threatened, they will get violent. That's all there is to it. So a mediator was called in and said, would you mediate the dispute between these two sides? And the mediator said that he would try. But here's the key part. The mediator disclosed up front to these white supremacists that decided they did want to sit down and talk, that he would not continue to mediate. This was his disclosure. He would not continue to mediate if they were going to threaten violence. He just said, that's not what I'm about. If you want to have a conversation with me, it's going to be respectful, it's going to be listening, and there won't be any threats of violence. Do you agree to that ground rule? And then to the other side, are you okay with that? So that's the importance of disclosure and contracting, is that you can disclose who you are and under what conditions you think it would be good to go forward. This next slide doesn't really have a caption. It's a beautiful picture. But what I really wanted to talk about here is one of the most important things that I'm going to say tonight, which has to do with developing listening skills. So I had been teaching mediation for about 3 years, and I went to a training. And at the training, the trainer said, how many of you ever practiced listening? And I just thought, you got to be kidding me. And it turns out that almost nobody had practiced listening, and that listening is a learnable skill. And so from then on, over the last 22 years, when I train mediators, and this is true in law school as well, I taught law school for about 27 years, you have to teach people how to listen. It's not a natural skill. It's different from everything else you've ever done. Now, if you find somebody who's a natural born listener, I strongly urge you to marry that person, because it's that important a skill. But there are the ways of learning and practicing mediation, both in a seminar, but it's very, very powerful. And the fact that everybody thinks they're good listeners, but they're not, says a lot. And that's true all across government, all through the church, everywhere. People just have lost the ability to listen. And the reason is because they think they know what the other person is going to say. They no longer believe that what the person has to say is important. Um, and so what we end up doing is we end up getting into a monologue. And dialogue and monologue, you know what they are. You can be in a classroom that's supposed to be a dialogue, and it's not, because the person is just lecturing. And you're thinking, why am I here? They could have printed it up, and it could have been part of the reader. And people go for monologue because they're in control. And a lot of teachers don't want to have questions from their students because they lose control and they might ask difficult and difficult questions and so forth. So you can't be judgmental and be a good listener. You have to realize that listening is different from interviewing, from problem solving. Listening is different from negotiating. It's different than suggesting solutions. It's different than praising people, flattering people. It's a special skill where you are empty and you have to check your heart when you want to listen. I'm not going to spend much more time on it because that's part of a larger training. But when we talk to people in and out of the church, through CCL, with our various organizations, in our family, we have to know where we are in our hearts. Are we just waiting for that moment where we can say, yeah, that's true, but, or are we really hearing what somebody else has to say? That's my message. That's the key message for tonight about talking to people. If you go into lobby with people or talk to your organizations and you're not prepared to listen, you're missing the great opportunity. If you want to be a trusted messenger, if you want people to listen to you, you have to listen to them. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the rest of these slides. This particular slide came out of a book from Frederick Krueger, friend of ours. He's been one of our presenters here. It's a book called Religion and Global Climate Change. But on page 192, he lays out his 4 principles to work across differences. And it's really, really important. This is the real deal. This booklet that they produced is fantastic. So you're getting people together that are different. You really have to invite them to say what they believe.
All right.
To say what's true. And then you have to request that they will honor and respect that the other person is going to say what they believe is true. You have to honor and respect what the other side. And then you have to encourage each person to refrain from extraneous issues. What is it that we're talking about? Can we just keep it at that? And that's hard to do. And avoid negativity and criticism of others. These are what we call communication fouls. Sarcasm, sometimes even irony, cynicism, disbelieving what other people say, imputing to them bad motives, using, bad language. Those are all communication fouls, and we try to avoid those because it doesn't help. It doesn't help at all. So I have one example that I think was one of the most impressive things I ever went to. It was a panel set up. You'll recall that in California, they had a Proposition 8 that was was to outlaw same-sex marriage in California. And this hit many LDS Latter-day Saint congregations like a bombshell and divided people in the pews. It was really very, very difficult. An attorney friend of mine set up a symposium at the University of California, Davis. It was a panel. And the theme was to talk about LDS Church and LGBTQ issues. And he set it up very, very carefully. And this is something that we can do around Earth Day, to have different sides and how to get them to have a good dialogue and conversation. So the panel had 2 speakers on each side. There were 2 members of the LGBTQ community, and there were 2 panelists that were there to represent the church's traditional views of marriage or sacred views of marriage. And I interviewed the guy who put it together. He says, yeah, he had each panelist agree to the ground rules in advance. A respectful listening, take your turn. And what they were charged to do was to acknowledge their differences, to speak their truth. I'm a gay person. This is my truth. This is the story that I want to tell about me, or whatever the story is. But then to listen to the other side and to find common ground among the panelists. And it was a beautiful thing to see, because after about 40 minutes into it, everybody realized that to everybody on the panel, family was really central, absolutely critical. And they found common ground. And it was really a wonderful panel and seminar. And I just wanted to add in that last note that one of the things they had to do to make it a safe place for people to speak their truths was to limit and screen audience questions. Because right away people will go off the rails and say, yeah, but, and then they're off with implied criticisms and so forth and so on. So that's most of what I have to say tonight. I've rambled on for 20 minutes. I've got a few other slides, but there's nothing there. This is the one that I promised you is that I would ask you about a meaningful discussion that you've had with people who are different from you. What made it work? And if it fell apart, why? What could have been different about it? So let me ask you, what experiences have you had in this regard? After 9/11, all institutions were stressed out. The whole country was stressed out. And we got hired, our nonprofit got hired to deal with the local hospitals because people were coming to the hospitals all freaked out. Everybody was running on adrenaline and in crisis mode. And so I was training and people would train me. You can't smoke in here. And right away there's a big conflict and it would escalate. And one guy who's a minister said, well, you don't just start saying that to people. You say, hi, my name's Tom Kane. What's your name? You introduce yourself. You go back to the rules of civility that create relationships with people, and then you can talk to them, and they realize you're not an enemy, you're more of a friend, and we're talking about a problem, which is there are these rules and so forth. So that's a good one, Rebecca. Any other examples where you got into a dialogue that was meaningful or failed?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Mike.
Hey, I'm in the car, so hopefully I'm sounding okay. But I have one that was successful to share, and then I have an inevitable one that's coming up at a Thanksgiving dinner next week that's not going to go well. And so I
Go for
thought
it.
I'd put that one out there and see if anybody had any thoughts on it. So
Sure.
the one that went really well. So this was back during the first Trump administration. I'm fairly centrist in my politics. I had an employee, very, I think, progressively, heavily left leaning. You know, well, I won't. I'll just leave it at that. And then I had another employee who was, I would call him we would probably call him a MAGA Trump loyalist in
Yeah.
that meeting. And we all were having dinner together, and we got into a conversation about politics. In fact, we were, in a restaurant in Washington, D.C. at the time. And it was we had probably a 3-hour conversation over dinner about a host of political issues. And it was a conversation that was really congenial. And I've reflected on this a lot. There was a lot of common respect between the three of us. We had worked together for a number of years, and while we knew at a level each other's political biases, we really got into the nitty gritty in this conversation. But I think because there was a pre-established respect, and there was this, we didn't have to like outline the ground rules of the conversation before we had it. I think we just sort of fell into this, shared respect of one another and allowing each person to speak their truth about issues, and and then someone else say, well, I see this very differently. I look at it this way. I don't think we solved any of the world's problems, but it was a conversation that I still remember because it was so impossibly exceptional from what, I think had been commonplace for me, which was debate, disagreement, conflict, character limitations on social media that result in these sort of very binary political conversations. So I think I think respect and a genuine friendship and interest in others, you know, at least from that experience, really made that work, where I've seen it fail so many times. So that was the good experience. Now the challenging one I'm going to put out to the group is I'm going to go to a Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday next week. There's a particular relative that I guarantee you will declare that they feel the very strong need to announce yet again to all of us that the impact of the ICE raids and the perceived, in their opinion, violations of civil rights is completely worth the cost that we're paying, and frankly will have absolutely no interest in anyone else's alternative point of view on that. And is there a way to bring a over the Thanksgiving dinner table conversation in a scenario like that to something that's more like the mediated conversation Tom was describing, or is it just better to do what we usually do and say, well, thank you for your opinion. Let's talk about, the Cowboys game that's on the TV right now. So I'm interested in anybody's thoughts on that.
That's a great one, Mike. I like it. By the
So
way,
this-
on your first one, you did succeed in that first conversation in bringing down the level of hostility. You lowered the emotional temperature. That's a great achievement right there. But let's hear from everybody else about how to tone down the Thanksgiving discussion.
so
Ours works.
I just want to get clarification. So this person just out of the blue will start saying this?
Oh yeah. I mean, we'll be having a conversation and we'll be talking about, this family event thing. And then this person will inevitably say, well, I guess got to tell you, I'm really glad that, I'm seeing this going on. And might not even be in the context of anything that was discussed at that point. But, and I think they're feeling like they're bringing some kind of patriotic display of and sharing of important knowledge to the conversation, even though it's generally not appreciated that way. But yeah,
One thing school teachers do that you might work is saying, that's fascinating. Thank you for that. Could I talk to you about that later this afternoon? I mean, lots of time teachers will defer a particular conversation to another context, but maybe that's patronizing. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we've become pretty good with this particular individual of just diplomatically changing the conversation because because our experience to date has been with this particular family member that anything that doesn't completely 100% align with their view of the world is going to turn into an argument that have at times become situations where people didn't talk again for years at a time, and
Yeah, that's not
had
good.
not happened.
Mike, I just have one thought. As it relates to climate, and it may relate to the same with your relative, that Catherine Hayhoe has said, it's helpful to recognize there are some people that are not going to change no matter what. And you can spend a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to come to a common ground or a common opinion, and they're just not. It's
Yeah.
related to their values, their allegiance, and so forth. And I know I think I told you about my friend. We agreed to disagree about climate change, but we share the apricots. But I spent quite a bit of considerable time talking with him, and I could spend some more, but I've decided after probably a couple or 3 hours of conversation, he's not interested in moving. And in fact, when in this particular situation, I invited him to come up to a seminar by the Wilkes Center on Climate Science and Policy, which is at the University of Utah. I thought, hey, well, this would be something kind of neutral. But he didn't want to have anything to do with that. And that kind of convinced me he doesn't want to hear.
Serve as a benefit. she really emphasizes if there's a place where you can find common ground, a common shared value, you know, some common place to work from, then you have something to work with there. But you also have to recognize there are just some people that you can't get there with. And by the way, shameless plug for everybody. We're actually recording a podcast episode with Catherine Hayhoe on Friday this week. That'll be published on the Holy Earth podcast and in a couple of weeks. This is actually a topic we're going to be talking with her about, is this, you know, idea of where and when can you find common ground to move people, and when can't you? So she's definitely been someone who I think has some great insights on that, certainly for climate change, but also, you know, philosophically for a lot of other issues as well.
So kudos to LDS Earth Stewardship for getting her support and getting her on that podcast. I know you've had some really good people on the podcast, and she will, you know, she's just so good and speaks so well. I think that'll be a real value having her on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Mike.
Indeed,
Good
no
work.
one better than Catherine Hayhoe on talking about tough issues.
I have a comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Lisa, you're first. Go ahead.
I just want to say, and there's a book called Crucial Conversations, and one of the main points is in the beginning of a conversation, make sure that everybody feels like it's safe for them to voice their opinions. And that, I guess that can be difficult when there's a person who is very adamant in their views about certain things, but I think reaching out with love and just letting them know that we appreciate you as a person, and you know, we understand we may not differ. I mean, we may differ in the way we see things, but we appreciate you, and then deflect, just kind of move on to a different topic, perhaps.
Good
Tom,
one.
Tom, I have a thing too. You know, going back to one of your earlier statements, when we feel like people are listening to us, we're more apt to listen to them.
Right.
And I put a comment in the chat box. I used to teach a class on communications, and I would ask people what's the opposite of talking, and they would say listening, and I'd say no, largely it's waiting to talk. It's not listening.
Sad but true, Phil.
But I give you an incident. One of the things that happened to me, it was when I first moved back to Utah. I was one of the managers for Canyonlands, and Canyonlands, because of the backcountry and the road system in there, had some of the off-road groups really upset with us and always taking shots at us. And one was an organization called the Blue Ribbon Coalition, and they were just nasty at times. And I'd been there about a year at the time, and I called up the president of the organization one day, and I said, I need your help. And that just really took him back. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I need your help. You guys are out there. We don't have enough rangers. Can we talk about how you can help us? And that changed that whole dialogue. I got invited to their annual convention to be a speaker and on a panel. I got to do a presentation on what Canyonlands was all about. And of course, I was able to weave into that some of a lot of the things that they loved about the park. And you know, it wasn't completely smooth, but it did change that relationship entirely.
Fantastic. Anybody else got one?
I can share a story I've shared with a couple of you before. And this has to do with my next door neighbor of about 15 years. And he and I come from fairly different places with respect to issues like climate and politics. We're on opposite ends of the spectrum. But the key is we have some real common ground. There's no one I've spent more time in the outdoors with than him. I mean, we've been on multiple day hikes, climbed 14,000 foot peaks. And all the time we're having dialogues. And yeah, we've come to some real kind of ugly disagreements, shouting at each other, literally. And we don't always share a common set of facts. Like, you know, is coal cheaper or or renewable energy, cheaper energy. That was the last big one that we disagreed on. And anyway, but he's smart and he's well read, and we can come back to it because we know we're going to get together again, and we have a lot we share, and we know, we might be at odds on one part of the hike, and a few hours later, we're just enjoying each other, and that's forgotten. We know we get together again. It's not a one issue relationship.
That's great.
And so it kind of works for us. And I don't think I moved him a whole lot in his belief about climate. He certainly hasn't moved me greatly, but we have an appreciation for each other, and we do have a common ground that we can share, and we're still good friends. So
Excellent.
I love finding common ground. Just begin a discussion, even if you spend an hour talking about the things you both love and share, and hobbies and interests, or what you've been doing the past year, and I found in a couple experiences I've had, uh, to, is when you start talking about how much you care for your family, and the experiences of family, and work yourself into your kids and how much you care about them or your grandkids. That is, when you get to that point in your conversation, that's a great jumping off point to ask each other, what do we do to protect those children from the challenges in this world? And it sometimes is a good lead in to talking about climate and things like that. When you get, everybody wants to talk about how to help your grandchildren.
Good one.
By the way, Tom, that picture, is that Heart Lake on that?
I borrowed it from one of you, I think. I can't remember who I got it from.
Okay, because I live by that. That's actually a lake that's the shape of a heart. That's a good one.
Okay.
Hmm.
Any other stories? I've got one to end with if we're there. The leader of the Conservative Action Team to come and talk to us for our Zoom, Craig Preston, to come and talk to us for our January meeting, because we wanna learn how this is being discussed. The good news, Rebecca, is people are still interested in talking about clean energy and cheaper energy and the markets for cheaper energy. Those are still real things. They might not want to talk about environmental stewardship, but as long as they're talking about the things that matter to us, we can use their language. So uh, I know everybody has this common ground, but whether we can make this into um, a C3 event or how we can approach it, I think there's plenty of work to do to figure that out. I think one of the things that leads us astray is we want to go too far too fast. We want people to agree with us, which is not an unreasonable goal, but it often doesn't work that way. My last example for me is called the Paris Bakers story, and this is after 9/11. Um, uh, the tension in Europe, in particular, where there was a lot of violence in France and other countries, where there was bombings on train and people were getting killed and so forth, um, and the hostility towards people of Muslim faith was very, very intense, and so nobody knew what to do about it. And a group of women in Paris started a group called the Paris Bakers Group. And what they did is they got together of all faiths. There were Jews, there were Muslims, there were Christians, and they got together to bake bread. That was the activity. And people were criticizing them, saying, what good does that do? And I think you all know the answer to that question. Um, you're making bread together. You're making friends together. You're learning that these are human beings, that you can talk to each other, you can enjoy each other's company. And just as you said, you can talk about your families. You can see each other in a different light. And that's when the good communication can really take place. Until then, you're talking at each other and so forth and so on. So that's the Paris Bakers Group, which is more of a reconciliation or conciliation than any sort of direct dialogue on a particular topic. So that's a pretty good model of what we can do to make friends, to talk to people.
Tom, I wonder, we have Elizabeth Currit and Mike Maxwell with us from larger organizations on our own. If we're going to try to arrange something around this topic of dialogue, civil dialogue, what would interest your organizations, Elizabeth and Mike? How could we structure it? How could we organize this and make it work sometime next year?
Mike's not on.
Oh, is he dropped off? Okay,
Yeah, he's dropped
we
off.
missed it. Okay.
For MWAG though, yeah, I really like this idea of a topic, and I definitely think would have interest from a lot of our members. And one thing I had kind of in the realm of talking about environmental stewardship or using whatever words that we've talked about at MWAG is Elder Caussé recently gave a BYU talk talking about environmental stewardship right from a Latter-day Saint perspective. And I think he did a really good job about, approaching it from a faith-based perspective and saying this is something that we should care about and is important to us. But it like, obviously it felt very non-inflammatory. But if we could incorporate something about talking about, recent guidance like that from an apostle or anything like that, I think having an aspect of it, I don't know what this summit would potentially look like if we're having, workshops or sessions, but having a talk or part of it kind of maybe based on that recent discussion that he started at the BYU campus could be cool and could be a way of since a lot of us are, I mean, I'm coming from a ward where I'm sure a lot of people don't necessarily care about the things that I care about, but it's something that comes up when I talk about my research or when they talk about what they're doing, going hiking for the weekend. And so I think if we had kind of a faith-based workshop or aspect of the conference or summit where you say, hey, here's how we can approach it from maybe a Latter-day Saint perspective or faith perspective, and that's a cool way to approach things. And that was what I had thought about and talked about with some people lately, since it was, I think, just last week that really cool new talk happened. But
Elizabeth, it was
yeah.
Friday, and I was present there with
Oh, good.
with Craig. Craig Smith was there with me,
Oh,
and
yes.
and 800 other people, and
Yeah.
it was a great event. He talked about caring for creation as an expression of love,
Yeah.
and I think that would be hard to argue with.
Right.
It's certainly a good place to start a conversation and maybe to build a discussion about.
Mhm.
Anyway, great suggestion.
And it feels like a cool, I mean, since that's so recent and since that came from an apostle and this is a largely LDS kind of audience that would have, I imagine that seems like a cool opportunity to bring it up.
Would that
Excellent.
speak to NWEG?
Yeah.
How can we draw them in, Elizabeth?
Yeah. I think just this overall topic with, discussion in a non-confrontational way, I guess. I forget what word we've been talking about, would definitely just bring them in from the beginning, since that is a lot of what MWEG does. And I think, I guess I know there's a lot of members throughout the state that might not be able to come in person to something like this. So just to get a large number of our members, it would be nice if there was a virtual option as well. And I mean, obviously there would be, but this faith-based perspective also would draw in more of our members that perhaps aren't haven't been as aware of the environmental sphere of things. That's one of our kind of initiatives is at MWEG, but not everyone is aware in or involved in that necessarily. And so I think, yeah, having kind of the faith-based talk especially would help, and then having a virtual option would be able to get quite a few more people from the state or even out of the state, but just more that wouldn't be able to come in person to something like that. I don't know, does that answer, does that help?
Yeah, it helps. It helps. Yeah, the format, time, place, how we do it,
Mhm.
that's good. I can't always travel out to Utah from California,
Yeah.
so that's great. Any other comments before we close?
I just had one comment, and this is do what I say, not what I do. But maybe you're aware that Senator Curtis, who's Senator from Utah, and Senator Mark Kelly, who Democrat from Arizona, had a discussion on UVU campus where Charlie Kirk was killed last Friday. And the discussion was exactly what we're talking about here, how to settle differences through dialogue, through understanding, not through violence. And I was gone when they had their discussions. I didn't see it. I'm definitely going to look at it. But there might be something there that we could draw from too, just because I think it's so dramatic that it was on the campus where Charlie Kirk was killed.
Yeah.
And also the status of the people. I think most people who know Mark Kelly, whether you agree with his politics, you got to respect him, and the same with John Curtis.
Great. Great idea.
I think that's a winning topic to talk about dialogue with kind of climate issues in the background, and not the primary issue. That's what we care about, but how we talk about it, and in a bigger way too. I think that's a winning sort of format.
Since I'm new to this, can you guys tell me what the format has been in the past? If it has been all like virtual or if it's kind of a workshop format or what it often looks like, I guess.
It's been live or hybrid, yeah, Elizabeth.
Okay.
We've used the Dome Chapel there in Salt Lake City, and a couple of times we had it broadcast. We had 100 and some one time.
Nice.
More success with Catherine Hayhoe because she's a huge draw as a keynote speaker. Um, but if it's the right keynote speaker audience, it need not be virtual. Some people are a little bit allergic to having it broadcast out or have open questions like that. So we're flexible, we're open. Um, so what we had talked about for the spring was a 2 hour thing, and maybe at some campus in the Salt Lake Valley, where the first hour is with a panel or keynote speaker, and the second hour are breakout sessions. For me, there's nothing better than practicing listening skills. There's just nothing like it. It's a
Mhm.
very unusual experience where you're practicing how to listen to people. So these are just kicking around ideas, but something like that is what we've been talking about.
That sounds great. Yeah, and I think MWEG would be happy to help with organizing any of that or any workshop that's needed too. That sounds great.
If U.S. Senator John Curtis wanted to talk to us, we'd probably
Mhm.
put aside our planning and have him come in and talk to us. But these are all things that we're hoping for.
That's awesome.
Okay, our next meeting is going to be December, what's the third Wednesday in December? I think it's the 18th. And we're going to be reporting on the recent CCL conference this last weekend, the virtual conference, and what direction CCL is going in. And the other thing we're going to be talking about is what happened this weekend at what Dave was describing. He and Craig went to report on statements by church leaders about environmental sustainability and so forth. So I hope that you'll invite others and come and join us on that third Wednesday.